Good afternoon and welcome to today's webcast, an intro to green finance, SDG goals and why they matter to finance professionals. This webcast is held jointly with the Chartered Banker Institute, Manchester Metropolitan University and ICAEW Northwest. In a moment, we will commence today's session and meet our guest speakers Anna Egan and Lauren Pama. Please note that we are recording today's webcast and it will be available to watch on demand. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to submit these via the Q&A box. We hope you enjoy today's webinar, and I will now hand over to Anna.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just do bear with me for one moment while I share my screen with you so that we can kick off. As Heather has helpfully indicated, my name is Anna Egan. I am the head of department here in accounting, finance and banking in Manchester Met, and I'm joined by a colleague, Lauren Pama from the Green Finance Institute. And today we just want to tell you or talk to you really a little bit about green finance and how that relates to the Sustainable Development Goals and really why it should matter and does matter to finance professionals among all the other professions really that we are seeing this become a more and more important aspect of the role in. I'm going to start with a slightly broader overview and then hand over to Lauren. We will have opportunities to have a Q&A and a good discussion following our initial presentation. So please, as you are going along, do feel free to pop questions specifically into the Q&A box, and that way we will be able to pick them up when we do finish. Welcome. I hope you do all enjoy this session, and thank you for joining us today. So initially, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about really what the Sustainable Development Goals are, recapping for many of you, and for some of you potentially introducing them, and to really just get an initial insight into why they are important. The SDGs were introduced in around 2015, and they are intended to be the universal principles that we use to focus on our sustainable development in an effort to align really what is our focus around sustainability and the fact that we do continue to develop across the globe. How do we join up the concept of maintaining a sustainable globe for all of us to engage with the concept of engaging in development, continuous development. So the Sustainable Development Goals were introduced by the UN to try to create these universal principles to bring us all together to focus on this area. Now, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they can be distributed across a number of key areas. And what we want to focus on really is how we get from engaging with these Sustainable Development Goals through to individual and organisational action, right down to the operations and the role of the finance professional within. And really the focus there should be on reporting on these Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals can broadly be broken down into 3 different areas if you want to focus on ESG, your environment, social and governance reporting, which many of us are much more familiar with. You take the environment there, for example, as is the focus of this session in and around green finance. And what we are focused on is areas such as clean water and sanitation, climate action and life on land. Now, what we would ask is that all organisations identify and adopt some form of Sustainable Development Goals. However, it's not realistic to engage with all of them. But doing so is becoming more and more difficult for organisations for a number of reasons. If we initially look at the global environment at the moment, what we have is significant upheaval in terms of energy prices and positioning because of the war on Ukraine. We have significant changes to governing parties across Europe, and that has real implications for how governments adopt and engage with these Sustainable Development Goals. And as such, with the level of support organisations are likely to receive when they do try to implement such goals. We also have, for example, more locally in the UK, a real political instability at the moment. and a bit of a question mark over where we are going to land in the next few years around what our engagement and ambitions are around the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, all of this means that we're going to go into COP27 in November with a real level of uncertainty around how we are going to progress action against these Sustainable Development Goals. But all is not lost, because what we do have is more and more organisations adopting these Sustainable Development Goals, and that creates more and more templates and footprinting around how we engage with them successfully. So what we can focus on is what's working well at the moment and how we transition that to more and more organisations and individual businesses. But the one thing that is key here is the use of specific and clear reporting measures around the SDGs. As an organisation, one of the positions that you don't want to be in is to be identified as essentially SDG washing, which is a term that has come out of the more traditional and recognisable focus on greenwashing. We've seen organisations before being branded as greenwashing, for example, H&M, that many of you will know, for engaging in a limited number of what appear to be climate positive actions without addressing their overall business model. And one of the focuses that is taking place at the moment is around the concept of organisations badging themselves as engaging in SDGs for the purpose of SDG washing. So we as individuals and organisations need to be very clear around what areas we want to focus on, how we are going to focus on them, and how we are going to measure ourselves against these targets going forward. And as I said already, this is proving to be something that will become more and more routine and accessible, because we have footprints in place now. We have templates that are used elsewhere. We can assess what is working, what is not working, and how we want to bring that forward. And so to give you a kind of an initial template of how we go about doing this, if we take, for example, the OECD's approach to moving from adopting an SDG to reporting on it via our environmental, social and governance reporting structure, they've presented what is a very clear set of stages that we should be engaging in. And the first step that needs to take place is that we need to present a business case. We need to understand why we are engaging in our SDGs and what the importance of that is. If you think about it as a finance professional, as somebody who might sit in a middle management level or a senior manager level, there are an awful lot of competing requirements on you and on your decision making. And so we need to have clarity around the business case for adopting these SDGs. Now, I would be able to say, I think that these are the most crucial elements that an organisation can engage with at the moment, but others would have conflicting views. So we need to understand what our business case is for adopting SDGs as the focus for our ESG reporting. Once we do that, we need to be making sure that we have transparency of impact. SDGs, as with any other major strategic initiative in an organisation, cannot be successfully actioned unless you have transparency of impact. So are we making it clear to others what we are doing and why? Are we sharing that more broadly? To what extent are we publishing our information around the SDGs and our progress towards the targets we set against them? And again, that can only be achieved if we have actually real priorities with regards to the SDGs and our focus areas. There are 17 of these. You are not going to be able to adopt all 17 and engage with the targets aligned with each of the 17 and successfully implement them. So within your organisation, what targets are you choosing? What SDGs are you choosing and why? And this is where you have to be really cautious, because you may have made real progress in relation to the first two steps. But if you're adopting SDGs that don't seem to align with your critical areas of engagement, then there's going to be questions raised around why you're focusing on these SDGs. What impact can you really have? And actually, what amendments are you making to your business as usual to try to support progress in relation to these SDGs? In addition to that, you want to be mindful of what locally might be the focus in relation to SDG targets. So, from a government perspective, is there anything that your local government are focusing on? And is this something that you can align yourself naturally with in order to then potentially benefit from support at a more significant level for your engagement with these SDGs? And once you have aligned them and you have an authentic reason for aligning with these SDGs, you should then be focused on developing KPIs and targets around them. This should be supported by the fact that if you look up any SDG that you are interested in aligning yourself with, there will be clarity around what the UN targets are against that SDG, and your targets should look to support this. And then you develop your KPIs on that basis, and you review and reflect on a regular basis. If this is an area that adds value to your organizational practices and does indeed matter to you, then this is something that you should incorporate with your annual strategic planning and review process. Now, all of this can seem a little bit, I guess, out of sync with what you might be used to traditionally in terms of the role that you have or the roles that you potentially may want to move into. And it could be a question of, but how do I actually do this in practice? And again, why does this matter to me? Well, this matters to you, as with any other major strategic focus of an organization, because it does feed down into all levels of the organization, and your engagement with SDGs, if it's authentic and if it is strategic in focus, should be embedded across multiple layers of the operations of an organization. You should see movement in relation to your SDG targets in every element of your organizational activities, and that includes in relation to finances. Now, I'm not going to delve into that too deeply, but I do want to finish off kind of my initial exploration of the SDGs with an example of a larger organization that engages with this in practice. I'm going to caveat it by saying that I don't necessarily believe that they are doing the most that they could be doing in relation to SDGs. So I'm not presenting them as, a star pupil when it comes to engaging in SDGs and then providing a structure for ESG reporting. What I am saying is that they are doing something and they are sharing it. And again, there's benefits to organizations of sharing their activity here. If they are engaging in it successfully, they want to be shouting about it because it does have positive implications. So an example for you then, everyone, is that around Danone. If you have a look at Danone, a very large global organization that produces hundreds, if not thousands, of products that have a reach across a significant number of countries, they have aligned themselves with 12 of the 17 SDGs. In doing so, they have identified what they believe is a major focus for their efforts and what they believe is something that they want to commit to in the future. Now, I've taken an example of SDG 13, and that is a major focus for Danone. It's also a focus on climate action. If you go to SDG 13, you will see that the UN have suggested that the focus for the next the next decade is really around ensuring energy efficiencies, increasing the focus on environmental investments, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and focusing on the risks and opportunities that we are presented with due to climate change. And one of the benefits of having such clear focus areas is that you can align your targets and your reporting around your action against SDG 13 with these areas. This is what Danone have done, and the most recent presentation of this is in 2019. We are expecting an updated one very soon. But to give you an example, they've set their climate ambitions that they have aligned with the SDG 13 targets, and they've said actually their focus will be really predominantly on reducing their emission targets. They've set their emission targets and had them improved by the Science Based Target Initiative, and they want to then define their targets and reduce their greenhouse gases in line with their concerns around a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global climate scenarios. In 2019, they measured their performance against these, and you can see there that they have so far achieved a 24.8% reduction in greenhouse gases and a 29.1% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in absolute scope there. They intend to have more specific milestones that they want to achieve by 2030. And they include a 50% emissions reduction by that period. And they also want to introduce some carbon positive solutions. What they have done is taken the SDG, the targets underlying that, and then they've translated it into some form of key performance indicators that they can measure themselves against. And they have reported and reviewed these. And they will continue to do that over the the remainder of the period through to 2030, and adapt and respond as appropriate. As I say, it's not a perfect example of an organisation engaging with the SDGs, but it is one quite comprehensive example, and it's something that we can draw from when we are trying to figure out actually how do we report on and engage in SDGs in practice. And I wanted to provide you with that case study to give you an initial kind of broad insight. But what I will do now is hand over to Lauren, who is going to introduce kind of the work that she does and look at some more specific pieces of information that are worthwhile sharing.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, we can just move on to the next slide. So just by way of introduction, I am Lauren Pammer. I'm a Programme Director at the GFI. So prior to joining about 2 years ago, I spent about 15 years in a number of finance and strategy roles at Lloyds Bank. And before that, I was a chartered accountant working in audit. So it's really nice to be here for this joint ICAEW, Chartered Banking Institute and Manchester Met event today, not least because I also live in Manchester, so I feel like I've ticked all 3 boxes. Just a quick overview of the GFI. We were formed 3 years ago on the back of a recommendation by the Green Finance Task Force, and we exist to do 2 main things, the third being knowledge building. But in terms of the first 2, we look at financing green and greening finance. So on the greening finance front, that involves areas such as working on the UK green taxonomy, the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures and Climate Disclosures, and a number of other areas, including voluntary carbon markets. And then where I fit in and the other programme directors is to look at financing green. So that's to take a sort of sector-based approach, looking at how we can mobilise more private capital in particular into parts of the economy that need to decarbonise for the UK and globally to achieve net zero. So if we just flick on, some of the areas that we're involved in, so I lead our decarbonisation of road transport programme, which is looking at how we can identify and unlock the barriers to investment into low carbon transport. We also have a built environment programme, which is started out in the UK, but it's now looking at rolling into Europe as well. So how can we encourage more finance into decarbonising the residential housing stock? We have we chair the UK's Green Taxonomy Advisory Group, and I'll mention the Green Taxonomy later. And then we also have a nature-based solutions coalition. So this is looking at how we can encourage more private investment into nature restoration, nature-based solutions, and to encourage biodiversity and make sure that those measures are included in investments. So we move on to the next slide. Thank you. COP26 last year saw dozens of countries make new commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but many people believe those pledges aren't ambitious enough. We also saw a number of financial institutions sign up to Mark Carney's GFAN, so the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, committing to put capital into net zero. We see the Climate Action Tracker is an independent scientific analysis that tracks government climate action and measures it against the Paris Agreement of holding warming below 2 degrees. They're looking at evaluating those climate change mitigation targets and policies and action, and aggregates that country level up to the global level, looking at what temperature increases are likely to be during the 21st century. And currently we're seeing that no countries are listed as being aligned to achieving the 1.5 degrees global warming. So clearly a lot more needs to be done to turn this map to green rather than the shades of orange or indeed in some cases black. If we can move on, it's clear as well then that as well as commitment from governments, more needs to be done then at that practical level. We've got an urgent need to scale up investment into climate solutions because we won't do the transition to net zero unless we can finance we won't do that transition by doing subscale investments. We need to transform entire sectors to be net zero. And that's going to take money and significant amounts of money. So green finance is the term that's used for finance that's being channeled into investments which help us achieve those net zero goals. In time, if we do that right, there won't be such a term as green finance. It should just be finance. But until that point, there's a need for us to have a real focus on how those financial flows can facilitate the greening of the economy. And this means that products are coming out which are specifically targeted at financing those green activities or at financing the transition, so what we can call transition finance. That need for transition is one reason we can't simply stop funding some activities, because companies who are engaged in brown activities need that financial support to transition away from what they're doing and into more climate positive activities. We have seen a real increase in green finance over recent years. Annual green bond issuance broke through the $500 billion mark for the first time in 2021, and we've continued to see the rise in that this year. But the graph on the right shows you that that investment is still insufficient. So annual investment in a clean economy is set to surpass 1 trillion in the next few years, but that's still far short of the level that we need. There's estimates that say it's going to, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is going to require $2 trillion annually by 2025 and 4 trillion annually by 2040. And we still see a number of financial institutions investing in activities which aren't supporting that transition. So obviously the rising investment is good and is encouraging, but far too little of that money is going into solving those hardest problems. Instead, what we see is much of that climate finance, both from the public sector and the private sector, is flowing into quite a narrow set of investable solutions whose business models have been proven, so things like wind and solar. So one of the reasons we exist is to try and tackle those sort of harder to solve problems, things like sustainable aviation fuel, carbon storage capture, things where the business model hasn't yet proven to be commercial and the money perhaps not quite flowing, and that's where we need to look at developing innovative demonstrator projects which unlock that capital so that it's ready then to be scaled. And we see a number of reasons that investors don't lend or aren't investing to some of these sectors. So that is things, the barriers that they face are things like lack of understanding, a lack of data, a lack of understanding of the risks, or perhaps inability to overcome some of those risks. And that's where we recognize there's a need for public capital and private capital to work together. So private capital has got the scale and has got the investment, but actually sometimes the risk profile is just too high and we need government money to de-risk some of that investment and crowd it in. We can just, I wanted to touch on a couple of examples of specific products that are out there which are part of the green finance sector. We'll just move on to the first one. So green mortgages. When we launched in 2019, the green mortgage market was really struggling to get off the ground. There were only 4 green mortgage products out there in the market. But the Committee for Climate Change estimated that around £250 billion is needed to be invested in UK home upgrades by 2050. And that could result in significant capital flows into green mortgages. But we understood that some of the challenges faced from lenders were fears around accusations of greenwashing, a lack of awareness and understanding, and low visibility about some of the technology available and how to then track that the money really was going into green investment in homes. So how can you actually then prove that the mortgage has been taken out and used to do home improvements and make the home more energy efficient? So the role that we play there is to speak to lenders and work with industry. And we delivered a set of green home finance principles with the Loan Markets Association, which was an open source document to really strengthen that green home finance market. We've since brought out a lender's handbook, which has explained the different technologies that are available and the different solutions that residents would have to make their home more energy efficient. So explaining things like cavity wall insulation and solar panels and what that looks like in terms of how to finance that and what the repayment profiles might look like. And it's really, and then also established a green mortgage hub to really help to accelerate the expansion of the mortgage market. What we see is that when one lender makes that first move, the other banks and building societies in the UK recognise what their peers are doing, don't like to be left behind, and then we see them launching green mortgage products at an ever increasing pace. So we're now seeing green mortgages in a variety of different forms, but all of them aim to incentivize homeowners to invest in improving the energy efficiency of their properties. And there's now more than 50 products on the market. So this isn't just about having a mortgage to buy a home that's already green. It's about encouraging homeowners whose houses are not particularly energy efficient, and we really struggle for that in the UK. And how do you actually encourage them to make that home more energy efficient? Obviously, the current kind of cost of living crisis is acting as a real lever for people to do that anyway, and see the sort of real-term reduction in their energy bills. So the next one I just wanted to touch on was local climate bonds. So this is a product which has got potential to raise millions of pounds for green projects in the UK. It's a regulated investment product launched by councils to access cost-effective funding for decarbonisation projects. And crucially, it offers local residents or people in the area an opportunity to invest in their area in a similar way to crowdfunding and to make a return from doing so. So it acts as a really great way of councils to engage with their local citizens. They can invest anything from upwards of £5 into this. And it's then used by that local authority to invest in things, for example, such as solar panels on council facilities, the development of electric vehicle charging points, or urban tree planting. So it's a really great way of local authorities raising some cost-effective borrowing and using that for climate positive impacts in their area. So just to move on to the green taxonomy on the next slide, couldn't quite get to 50, but in recent years, what we've seen is that investors have increasingly taken action to integrate climate change and broader sustainability concerns into their investment decisions and portfolio allocations. But we need greater certainty on the environmental sustainability of different types of investments and economic activities to avoid those accusations of greenwashing, so appearing to be green but not really contributing to the net zero transition. I suspect we can all recognise some examples of that. In response to that, a number of jurisdictions have started to legislate to bring out official definitions of sustainable finance. So in other words, to develop green taxonomies, effectively a dictionary which seeks to define which activities are green and which aren't. And it's not a particularly simple issue, which is why there's a number of different taxonomies and they're all at different stages of development. If you take, for example, electric vehicles, they're a really crucial way of transitioning away from fossil fuels in terms of the transport agenda. But is the steel that goes into them green? Are the batteries manufactured sustainability? So you can see why these taxonomies take a number of years to develop. They're proliferating rapidly. So our research showed that there's over 30 different taxonomies around the world that are said to be in development or being implemented. Some of them are developed by private sector, academia, or by non-government institutions, but most of them are developed by the sovereign states themselves. And what we're seeing is that some of those have a political or diplomatic context. So, for example, a mineral extracting economy like Canada might focus on a transitional sector taxonomy, or a country with a wide divergence in income like India might prioritise social justice issues. The EU taxonomy is the most comprehensive and granular in terms of the sectors and sustainability objectives covered, whereas China focuses on disclosure around things like sustainable financing instruments. And this sort of continued provision of national taxonomies could make problems worse associated with market fragmentation, increase some of those transaction costs, and actually make the challenge of greenwashing higher, because it gets even more confusing, particularly when you're looking at global financial flows, to understand what's green in one country may not be seen as green in another country. So clearly a lot more to do. We're currently working on the UK's green taxonomy, and just coming back to batteries as an example, there's an organisation or a group called the Global Battery Alliance, which is looking at developing a battery passport. And that's a digital twin to a physical battery that will track its provenance from the mining of the raw materials and how ethical that's been, to how the materials are transported to the manufacturer and the energy that's used in the process, for example. So there's a lot going on in this space, and I would just encourage you to watch what's going on and try and follow it. So just moving on to something slightly different. And I guess back to you guys as members of either the ICAEW or the Chartered Banking Institute. Developing the green finance knowledge and skills of you as finance professionals will really help the mainstreaming of green and sustainable finance into the future. we're currently witnessing ESG's evolution from a sort of niche field into mainstream practice. And we need to continue developing that system in which all financial institutions and allocators of capital integrate the climate decisions into their decisions across all classes of financial assets and all sectors of the economy. You know, this is a growing market, and it really is scaling up. And hopefully, like I said before, green finance will cease to be a term in the future, and we'll be back to calling it finance. But we're way off that at the moment. You know, you guys do matter. The change we see in mainstreaming green finance need to be led by increasing numbers of finance professionals with an understanding of the role of financial services in supporting that transition to a low carbon world, and with the knowledge and skills of finance to be able to develop and deploy products, services and tools that will mobilise capital to support the transition, address those climate related risks, and direct customers and communities towards investments that enable green finance opportunities. You know, all executives and investors and everyone within an organisation should be taking this seriously, not just those with sustainability in the job title. And talking about jobs, just onto the next slide. You know, sustainability credentials are very much sought after in the jobs market at the moment. 1 in 5 workers and around 6 million jobs in total will be affected by the transition to net zero, with about 3 million workers needing upskilling and about 3 million in high demand. And we're seeing that the demand for ESG skills is outpacing supply. So about 3/4 of finance professionals report a sustainability skills shortage at their organisation. We're seeing an awful lot of ESG certificates through online learning being offered as well, and business schools are starting to integrate ESG education into their courses. I know it's on the curriculum at the Institute of Chartered Accountants and at the Chartered Banking Institute. And it's you know, I would encourage you to look at the sort of the continuing professional development courses offered by both those organisations that focus on sustainability and green finance, and encourage you to look at those. And I've just put on the slide just a few of the roles that we see across financial services. You know, some of these are sort of director level, but there's entry level roles, there's analysts, and you know, I would just encourage people to say that green finance and sustainability is, you know, is really hot at the moment, and it's something that employers are really keen on. So just moving on to a final slide, which I just thought I'd touch on some ways that actually you can use your money to make a difference as well, just trying to bring it back to what you can do as individuals, because, you know, sometimes the scale of the challenge feels quite overwhelming. So there's some really kind of simple things that you could do to make a difference. The first of those is looking at your current account. So are you with a bank that aligns with the climate standards that you want it to? You know, many leading banks promote the fact they don't lend to fossil fuel companies, but there's some that go further than that. So for example, Triodos don't invest money in industries such as mining, fracking, coal, or other fossil fuels. Starling are paperless without branches, which immediately lowers its carbon footprint. And again, they've pledged to be net zero. Green mortgages. So if you're buying an energy efficient property, you might be eligible for a green mortgage. But again, you might also be able to borrow some of that money using a green mortgage to actually make your home more energy efficient. And green mortgages are offered by several institutions now, including NatWest, Nationwide, Ecology Building Society. Green investing. So are your investments aligned with your values? Are you investing into shares in company, you know, are you investing in shares or ISAs in companies that are ESG aligned? Green loans, again, that's something you can, that some banks such as Tandem Bank offer to enable you to afford energy efficient home improvements. So you can borrow money on the proviso that you're making those improvements to your home. Probably the biggest thing you can do is your pension. So is your pension ESG aligned? There's about £3 trillion invested in UK pensions, and the Make My Money Matter campaign, which was set up by Richard Curtis, says that actually making your pension green is the single most effective action an individual can take to reduce their carbon footprint. Making your pension green is apparently 21 times more effective than going vegan, stopping flying, or switching to a renewable energy provider combined. And just on that last one, in terms of switching to a renewable energy provider, you know, you can choose to switch your energy. It might be slightly more challenging at the moment with prices, etc. But you know, you can switch to green tariffs. There are a number of UK domestic energy suppliers who offer 100% renewable energy tariffs, for example, someone like Octopus. So they're just some of the sort of simple ways that actually, you know, without making too much of without too much difficulty, you can use your money to make a difference and really make that matter and contribute to the transition to a net zero economy. And that is all I've got to say. So I'll pass back to Anna, and I think we are open for questions.
Thank you, Lauren. We are indeed. And so I will just check to see what has come through so far. So I see a question sent in via the chat that's asked, for example, should big banks be lending for fossil fuel production? And how do lenders choose which brown projects to support?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because in an ideal world, you want them to just stop lending to fossil fuels. But I think the reality is this is a journey that we are on, and it's not a one or the other. You know, there are shades of green and shades of brown. So I think there will, unfortunately, for a time, be a need to continue to extract fossil fuels to actually manufacture some of the things that perhaps we need to transition to green. So, for example, wind turbines. You know, at the moment, the materials used to make those and electric vehicles, you know, might not be completely free from fossil fuels, but the reality is, without that, you know, it'll be a challenge to get there. So I think what we are doing is, you know, increasingly, and we're seeing that from shareholders as well, you know, increasingly putting pressure on those investments to make sure that companies like Shell and BP are committing to going through that transition. So, you know, they're using that money not necessarily to go out and look for more or new sources of oil or to scale up oil production, but actually equally to, you know, to continue investing in wind. And I know BP have a very large solar farm, for example. But it's not a simple question, I don't think.
It's not, and it aligns a little bit with what you mentioned earlier, I think, around the idea of, even with the switch to electric vehicles, it's hard to categorize and determine actually what the overall impact on the environment is of, for example, doing something like this. For example, one of the biggest growth areas for electric vehicles is SUVs. And actually, regardless of whether SUVs are electric or diesel, they still have a very significant carbon footprint, much more so than traditional kind of economy style cars. And it's the balance of how do you measure which is more right, I guess, than the other, when it is so difficult to measure the implications of every single component attached to the activity.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I think it's which is more good and which is least bad as well. You know, and I don't think there's any sort of silver bullet to these questions. It's about, I guess, doing what you can, you know, and not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. The main thing is that we are all working towards the same goal. And I guess what some of the car manufacturers will say is that, I mean, SUVs have been driven over the last few years by sort of consumer preference for that type of vehicle, where we're seeing them transition those vehicles fastest now to electric, is because that's where the bigger profit margins are. So if they can sell those larger vehicles, bigger profit margins, they've got more to plow back into producing the smaller vehicles more quickly, is what they will say. How true that is, I don't know. But yeah, I think there's an action on people, I think, just to do their bit as well. So do you need an SUV, and, you know, do you need a lot of the things that people go out and buy, and actually how can we start to get away from that? But that consumer behavior piece is a lot more challenging.
It is, because it is that, and it also feeds into that idea of, I mean, what comes first, the consumer demand or the presence of, and how do you break that cycle?
Yeah.
Which is another very big question. We've got another one here from the chat that asks, with so many SDGs, how do we prioritize them for business and for my clients? And now, it would be my view very much that you align them very clearly with what your organizational focus areas are. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at someone like Danone, I would expect them to have SDG alignment in and around areas such as clean water for all, climate efficiencies. It is about the idea that they know where they're contributing most actively. So it's taking that step back and saying, where am I contributing most actively in potentially a negative fashion around what our sustainable development should look like, and how can I align myself with SDGs that will help me respond and develop in that area. Equally, because it's not all necessarily about turning negative actions into positive. Equally, where am I doing quite well that actually I want to be able to say, well, look, what I'm doing here relates to an SDG. It's a positive behaviour that I'm engaging in, and that is a focus area that I want to amplify and continue to enhance, and essentially just wrap up my activities in this area. For it to be authentic and for it to be accepted, it does need to have that alignment with your more general strategic activities and operations, your business as usual. Without that, you really run the risk now of finding yourself in a position where it's a communications piece. It's something that actually, once somebody asks you that one slightly challenging question around it, you find yourself unable to articulate what it is you're actually doing and what your end kind of output is. So it has to be something that you're able to clearly embed within your organizational activities. Otherwise you will find yourself kind of, I guess, referred to as SDG washing, which is a position you don't particularly want it to be in. Lauren, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
No, I was just going to say, it's, you're not going to achieve all 17 in one go, are you? So actually, I think it's about finding some of the quick wins. So are there any of those SDG goals that actually you can do sooner than others, and then it's about prioritizing. So if you can look at responsible consumption and production, or you're not as an organization suddenly going to end poverty by your own activities, but affordable and clean energy, that's something that you can probably commit to fairly easily. Gender equality, that's about having policies within your organization that encourage and promote gender equality. So I think there's, it's about taking a look at them and saying, well, how do they fit my organization, and which of them should I prioritize, and in what order?
Absolutely. And then we have another one come in through the chat box that proposes that the activities kind of are all really encouraging, but to what extent in the UK are they linked to political commitment, or is the momentum now moving away? I'm only going to give one sentence on this to say that it's all so disruptive at the moment that I find it incredibly difficult to figure out, where we are currently sitting in relation to some of these activities. Lauren, you may have slightly more expert insight into this.
I don't know if I've got expert insight, but I would say that the having the political will behind this activity is crucial. So long-term government policy and regulation is really crucial for mobilizing investment, so that the single biggest thing that really focused investors' mind about the transition to electric vehicles in the UK was the government bringing forward the phase-out date for the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles to 2030. That suddenly kind of said, actually, this is happening. That means that long term, we know that vehicles are transitioning. That means that actually, if we invest in charging infrastructure, that infrastructure is going to be used, because we can see the direction of travel, and that is very clear. So I would say that actually political commitment is critical to encourage investment. I mean, you've seen this week kind of the impact that government decisions on policy and tax policy can have on the markets. So that kind of stability and long-term direction of travel is really, really important. I also I'm hopeful that the political commitment is still there. So we spend a lot of time working out which MPs are, have climate change, you take it seriously and are really committed to that goal. And it was really great to see Chris Skidmore, for example, named as the climate change, working on climate change and having specific ministers for that. So I would hope that the political will is still there and it's not something that they want to back away from, but that's definitely something that we keep a nervous eye on, because I think that would be fairly disastrous if some of those decisions were U-turned on.
Thanks, Lauren. We've got a couple more coming in through Q&A, and one from Andrew asking, do we think the world is on track to achieve the 17 SDGs by 2030. He knows that we're not on track for the climate goals, but are there any SDGs where good progress is being made? I don't think we're going to achieve, I personally don't think we're going to achieve the majority of them by 2030. I think what we see is a pace of change in relation and movement and momentum in relation to some SDGs, but it's so variable across the globe. And this is the issue, they are universal SDGs. You know, if we are to measure success, we need to measure it universally. And for example, Lauren mentioned there, gender equality. We are seeing positive movements and stretches in some countries and in some industries, but then again, you know, we are seeing kind of a backwards momentum in others. So I am not particularly positive, and I must say I'm very positive about sustainability overall, but I'm just not particularly positive about achieving those goals by 2030. I think that they're stretch targets, and I think that they're unlikely to be achieved. Lauren, I don't know if you've got a conflicting view.
No.
And then we have another one from Anna Hardy-Watmo. How do companies choose which of the SDGs they report on? Is it about cherry picking, or is they report on areas where they're doing well, ignoring those that need more attention? And I think that does relate very much to what we were talking about earlier, the idea that actually, as you mentioned, Lauren, some of the ways that they do it is by identifying areas that they can have quick wins in. You know, you're already doing things, you know, badge them and categorize them and catalog them in relation to an SDG. It's a really valid approach, because ultimately you are likely doing those things and aligning them to a more local variation of sustainability reporting previously. Now that we have the SDGs, it's about badging that activity under that area and focusing on making progress in that area. And then I do think as well, there is a relationship between, or there should be a relationship between SDGs that you report on and your strategic activities. How are they both aligned? In a more cynical viewpoint, I do think that some of the larger organizations will align themselves with or report on SDGs that they know they can make quick gains on, as a bit of a communications piece as well, because it looks nice. It does look nice to be able to say, actually, we are making progress on this SDG. Let's highlight it. Let's add a lot of our literature around it. I'm thinking, for example, of companies such as Coca-Cola, who use a significant amount of water as a resource, but badge themselves very effectively as an organisation that are engaging successfully with SDGs. I don't know if you have anything different again to add, or anything else on that, Lauren?
No, I would just add that yes, there probably is an element of cherry picking, but I think actually, even if none of these goals are bad goals, so it's not like you can cherry pick a one that's going to do harm against others that are doing good. So I think there's still some great some great strides that could be met if people are working towards one or two of them. And I think some of it's really hard to make no progress on 17 things. Actually, if you could make really great progress on one area and move on to the next, that's also good.
Absolutely. We have another one from Heather asking, what are the ways we as individuals can champion sustainability at work? What can we do to contribute from an individual basis?
Well, I think I touched on some of the things that you can do with your own money from an individual basis. But I guess at work, from the pensions perspective, speak to your employer about the pension scheme and whether that is a sustainable pension scheme. So I know, for example, ours is at work, and automatically everyone who signs up is into that same kind of sustainable, ethical pension scheme. I think it's about speaking to your employers about, what else could they be doing? Have they signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals? What are they doing on their emissions reporting? So, their sort of their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Are they offering things like salary sacrifice? So for electric vehicles, so that's a mechanism by which, as an employee, you can access an electric car and take advantage of some of the tax benefits of doing that. Similarly, things like cycle to work, are they facilitating you to travel to work in a sustainable way? So can you shower if you cycle or you walk to work, or are you sort of forced into taking the car? So I think there's lots of little things like that that actually you can do and speak to your employers about, how are they helping and either helping you as employees be more sustainable or, transitioning the work that they do.
Brilliant. And we have another one here, how to address the importance of green finance within university and MBA curriculums. And I think for me, personally, it's about embedding it throughout and making sure that it sits as a central part of the discussion in relation to any topic area, rather than being that 1 week on green finance. Because as long as it remains as a 1 week on green finance, it's not going to be considered really as something that matters in relation to how you're going to use those skills in practice. So it's about demonstrating from education right through to practice, actually how we embed green finance and decision making around green activities in relation to every aspect of organizational activity. I know we're talking about it from a finance element here, but it is about the decisions that you make in operations. It's about the decisions you make strategically, and to what extent are you taking that extra step of thinking about the sustainability implications of all of these decisions. But it would be my view that it should very much just be embedded.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that comes back to what I was saying before about actually at some stage, green finance shouldn't be green finance. It should just be finance. And the same with sustainability, that just becomes how we live and how things are done. But I think we're a way off that yet.
We have another one through on the chat, asks, is there any data about the impact on recruitment and retention of organizations that are truly pursuing these ESG goals? I don't have any data. I have anecdotal evidence in support of this, particularly for, from my perspective, for young graduates who are very keen to engage with companies that they view as aligning with their morals and principles. And, carving out graduate careers and beyond that sit with those morals and principles. So really interrogating what the values of organizations and fish are before they agree to join them.
Yeah, I'm the same. I haven't seen any data yet, but definitely anecdotally, and we see that at GFI as we know well. People are really keen to join us, and the majority of our staff are ex-financial services. So, some of them have been in investment banking and have earned large salaries and large bonuses, and actually they want to come to us. And they've taken quite significant pay cuts in some instances because they said, we actually now want to work for an organisation that's making a difference, and we've seen how important that is. So I think, in the current jobs market, people are looking around and saying, does that organisation work for me, as well as do I want to work there because does it have the same beliefs that I do, and is it making a difference? It will be really interesting to see whether that is backed up by data at some stage, but I definitely think we are seeing that as employers, and we're having to be very serious about our goals and our achievements and what we're doing, and people are super keen to come and work with us because they want to have that that impact.
Brilliant. I think we may have now run through all of the questions that have been sent on to us today. So given that we are just shy of 2 p.m. and I'm sure many of you are finishing up your lunch break, I will bring this to a close by saying thank you very much to Lauren, my co-panelist or host today, and thank you all for attending. I hope you found some value in this and you enjoyed it, and I encourage you to continue keeping an eye on future CPE events and sessions that will be organised. Thank you all very much. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.